This is about a friend of mine, Todd, who I met while working at a grocery store. I don't recall how we got into the subject, but he told me about a pretty frightening experience that he and his girlfriend had just a few years ago. I get goosebumps whenever I think of it, and I thought I would share it on here with you guys. His experience sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, and I hope you guys enjoy it. First of all, we live in the northern Adirondacks. There are woods and wildlife everywhere, lots and lots of back roads too, some of them not even paved. Anyone that lives in or has visited the countryside knows how winding and isolated some of these roads can be. Anyways, on to the story. Todd and his girlfriend were hanging out one night, and they decided to go out on a late night drive. They hopped into his truck and drove around the back roads for a bit. It was around midnight. They had been traveling on an isolated dirt road for some time when she suggested that they pull over and make out for a while. He agreed and pulled over, letting the truck idle while they started to get steamy. After a few minutes, she suddenly stopped and said, "I hear something outside." They paused and waited, but heard nothing. They resumed kissing, and she stopped a second time and said, "I can hear something outside." Again, they were silent and there was nothing to be heard. It was probably just a raccoon or something, he said, as they resumed a third time. After a few minutes, Todd heard what his girlfriend had been talking about, only this time, the sound was coming from under the truck. He recalled it sounded like something heavy dragging along the dirt. They both froze in fear. "I'm gonna open the door and see what's under the truck," he whispered, and opened his door and looked down. What did he see? A man's face looking back at him from underneath the truck. He immediately panicked and floored the gas pedal, running the man over with his rear tires. They sped home as fast as the truck could go. Neither of them were able to sleep for a few nights, nor did they ever return to see if that guy was alright. Todd was worried that there might be something on the news about a guy being run over on a remote back road and had been left there. There was never anything mentioned about it. Of course, what would that guy even say to the police? "Yeah, I was under someone's truck on a deserted road in the dead of night, and they ran over me." Who was that guy, and what was he doing? Was he trying to cut the brake lines? Was he going to try and kill him? Maybe he had a twisted way of playing some prank on someone. We'll never know. I'm happy that it didn't turn out any worse than it did, and it only played out to be a scary encounter and not a breaking news headline of a double homicide. It was the second week of January 2006. I remember that because it was the week after the first Hostel movie was released, and I really wanted to see it, so I did. I had to Google its release date, but I remember that I saw it the week after. For the decades surrounding this time in my life, I was a bartender, so if you're familiar with that lifestyle, you'll understand me when I say that Tuesdays and Wednesdays were my weekend. I often had to do things by myself, as all my non-partying friends had real jobs, and they were never available on weekday afternoons. It was a Tuesday when I went to see a matinee showing of the flick at an already dying mall, so needless to say, I was one of the two people in the theater for the 11:30 start time. The other person watching the movie is the reason for this post. Other than the one seat, I had my pick of the spots, so I could choose one in the upper middle section of the theater. I always like to get to the movie before even the previews start, and I was taken back a little bit by a man sitting in the middle of the seat in the front row. Like the very front row, closest to the screen. Fine, whatever. He was wearing a yellow rain slicker, and the hood part was covering his head. He was sitting so still that I didn't even notice him until a particularly bright preview came on the screen and reflected his raincoat. He didn't move at all. He had no drink or snacks. He just sat there with his head craned far up in order to see the screen from his seat. It was almost creepy how still he was, just sitting there. I made a point to keep my own snacking quiet as to not draw any attention towards me. I don't know, it was just a super weird vibe. So, once the movie started and the theater went dark, I put him out of my mind. He would rocket back to the front of my attention not long after. Remember the first real gruesome scene in the movie, where one of the main characters gets his Achilles tendon sliced open? That scene was startling enough, but what added to it was the horrendous laughter that rumbled from the front of the row. The guy was laughing like crazy, and I think I remember him clapping once in that scene too. It was like a laugh that all of us horror movie people blurt out when someone gets killed or whatever. It was like Krusty the Clown after riding a rail of coke. His laugh would end as abruptly as it started, and he laughed at every single damn scene where an innocent person got injured or worse. He never laughed when the bad guys in the movie got theirs. It was like he was living vicariously through the killers and completely getting off on it. All the while, he never moved, never took his jacket off. Even his shoulders barely moved during the laughing fits. I wanted to piss myself, and by the time the movie was over, I was already standing near the exit with one foot out the door. I exited the theater and went right into the lightly populated mall walkway, staring at the theater door the entire time, but I never saw him leave. It bothers me that I never actually saw his face. I guess he could just be anyone. This happened 4 years ago, when I was 4 months pregnant and at home with my 17-month-old son asleep in his bed. It was a Monday morning, and my husband usually left on the weekends to go to work around 7:45. That day, he had a doctor's appointment and wasn't going to work. He left to go to the convenience store down the street at about his usual time leaving the house. I was sitting up in bed and got up when I heard the door shut, and I assumed he just forgot something. Instead of my husband, it was a strange man, brown hair and in his 20s, about 6 feet tall, with a very muscular build. It was obvious he worked out a lot. Later on, I noticed a dragon tattoo on his forearm, some kind of tribal dragon. He had a knife, and he told me to take him to a bedroom and nobody would get hurt. I froze. My heart was racing. I was sweating and shaking in disbelief and terror. I had never seen this man before, and here he was, standing with a knife, and he looked like he was enjoying my obvious fear. I was pregnant and kept repeating, "I'm pregnant, please don't hurt me." My son was asleep in the master bedroom, and I was praying he wouldn't wake up and walk out. I'm shaking just thinking about this again, and typing it out. I went to the guest bedroom with him, and he told me to get on my knees. I was so terrified that I froze and peed on myself. He laughed and forced me down and got behind me with his knife to my throat. It was pressed so hard against my throat that it broke skin. He was yanking my panties down from behind with the knife while telling me terrible things he was going to do to me. Silently, I'm still praying my son won't wake up, and out loud, I'm begging him not to hurt me. My golden retriever at the time was about 6 months old. He was growling and scratching at the door of the room we were in. Later on, I found out that my dog scratching at the door frantically was what let my husband know that something was wrong. I wasn't just in the bathroom like he thought when he first walked back into the house. All of a sudden, the bedroom door busted open, and my husband was standing there with his big decorative display knife we kept beside our table. Without the display stand, it was pretty intimidating. He told the man to get off, and he wouldn't kill him right now. His eyes were scary. He looked so angry, even though I knew that he was terrified. He had heard me begging when he put his ear to the door. He had no idea what he was walking into. There could have been 2 men, or he could have even had a gun. The guy actually smiled at him, but he circled around the room and slowly backed out of the room, and then left the house. My husband followed him all the way out to the man's truck, which he had parked halfway up the block. We got his license plate number and called the police. It turned out that the plate was stolen, and they never caught the guy, and we moved out of the state a month later. The detective said that she thinks it was someone who may have followed me home from the bar I was working at during the time, and that he probably watched our house to find out when I would be alone. More than likely, this man watched me and plotted and planned to do this to me. I wonder if he planned to kill me. I think he did. Since that day, I have never, ever felt safe in my own home again, and I still have nightmares about this man.